Well, welcome to the Sovereign CEO podcast. I am Caleb Jones. This is Sovereign CEO. Moving to a less bad country, or setting up an international backup plan, or setting up your own location, independent income, and doing all these things for very little money. Today, let's talk about the bank failures. The collapse continues. And this is another one of those podcasts where I don't really have an outline. I'm just going to speak extemporaneously, although I have a lot of things to say about this. I mean, I'm looking at my outline right here. It literally says bank failures in USA. Yeah. So here's the one problem with this, is that this is related to current events, and I record these several weeks before they go live. So just for context, I am recording this on March 16th, 2023. So maybe more bank failures will have occurred by the time you actually watch this video. Matter of fact, they probably will have. Certainly we have Silicon Valley Bank that failed, where people withdrew $42 billion in like 6 hours. Yes, and they just published a graph showing that Silicon Valley Bank is actually one of the more stable banks in the US banking system. So this is just the next phase in the collapse of the Western world and the collapse of the United States in particular. Now, a few things about this. Number one, top of the list. A lot of you are very upset in my audience, rightfully so, that the government is basically bailing out this bank. And the government will continue to bail out banks because they will use the stupid argument of, well, we have to protect the entire system. I will cover that argument in a second. Here's what I've been saying for, since 2008. And this should not be a surprise to any of you. If you are an American, and also to a lesser degree a Canadian or Western European, but certainly if you're an American, your tax dollars go to bail out corrupt, risk-taking, wealthy bankers. That is where your tax dollars go. I have talked about this many, many times. The number one reason I left the United States was I got tired of paying these high taxes. And one of the things I always use as an example for why I was pissed off paying all these taxes is because a lot of my tax dollars went to bail out multi-millionaire, sometimes even billionaire bankers who take stupid risks with their money and their banks, knowing that the government will bail them out with your taxpayer dollars. And if you don't like that, guess whose fucking fault that is? Yours. Look in the fucking mirror. For the last 35 years, have you been voting for libertarians? No. You've been voting for people who love big government on steroids, people like George W. Bush, people like Donald Trump, who jacked up federal deficit debt spending faster than any other president in US world history, even before the pandemic. And certainly if you're a left-winger, people like Biden, people like Obama, people who love big government. I don't see you guys electing libertarians. I don't see you guys even voting for libertarians or anything like that in terms of third party. As a matter of fact, during the Trump-Hillary election of 2016, where you had two of the most unlikable people in the country running for presidency, the Libertarian Party, or at least other third parties, should have had at least 10, 12, 11% of the vote. They got 1%. So if you have supported or voted for or elected Trump, Biden, Obama, Bush, or any of the alternatives, guess whose fucking fault this is? This is your fucking fault, because all those presidents directly contributed to this problem. I will remind you that stimmy checks were invented under Donald Trump. Now that goes into the next thing. The next thing is that people say, well, the government is bailing out these banks. They should bail out me. No, they shouldn't bail out you either. What's really funny is I just saw a video Jon Stewart was talking about when he interviewed Tim Geithner, who was behind the bailouts in 2008. See, we've already done this. The United States is just going to keep doing this forever until they collapse. And Jon Stewart actually made a valid point. He said, well, instead of bailing out the banks, why didn't you just bail out the people who held the mortgages? Because that would have been much less expensive. Now, you shouldn't bail out anybody. I'm leading to a point here. He said, why don't you just bail out the people who actually own money on the mortgages? Then the derivatives would have been fine. They would have been healed. And Tim Geithner said, oh, moral hazard. Can't do that, moral hazard. That means, well, if you bail them out, they won't learn anything, and then they'll keep doing it, and it'll be worse. So then John Stern says, okay, you're bailing out all the banks that purposely made shitty loans for the past 10 years. So why is it not moral hazard there? And Tim Geithner said, well, but he danced. He said something like, well, you had to land the plane, which is basically meaningless. So the government is not on your side. And every time you vote for someone who is not an extreme libertarian, you're going to perpetuate that system. Now, it's too late to save the United States. You can start voting for libertarians now. It won't do a goddamn thing. You could elect a libertarian president right now, and America's still fucked. Matter of fact, I've been very consistent about this because I'm rational. I said this about Ron Paul, not Rand Paul, Ron Paul, way back in 2012. To all my libertarian buddies who are excited about Ron Paul, oh, Ron Paul for president, oh, it'll change the thing. I said to them the exact same thing I said to the Trump supporters in 2016. I said it's too late. Ron Paul could be president in 2012, America will still collapse. The window for saving America was around the 1990s. America truly collapsed around 2001, 2002, somewhere in there. 15 years before Trump was ever elected. And about 20 years ago before these banks started dying again. Next thing is that we now have a precedent in the United States and other Western countries where the United States government, your tax dollars, are going to be used to bail out these banks. And the banks know this. So the banks are going to do whatever the fuck they want. They're going to be as risky as they like because they know they'll just go crying to the government and the government will bail them out. And the government will use the excuse, well, we have to bail them out to protect the system. I don't normally watch Scott Adams, but I saw a clip of one of his videos he did a little while back on this issue, and he said, well, that's just stupid. It's not about bailing out this bank. We have to bail out this bank because we have to protect the system. You should do some history and some research around the world. There are various countries around the world, including Scandinavian countries and South American countries, who had these kinds of systemic problems with their banks. And instead of bailing out the fucking banks, they just let the banks go under. And yes, it was very painful for about 2 or 3 years. And after 2 or 3 years, they rebounded and the economies did just fine. That's how capitalism works. We do not have a capitalist system in the United States. We have a corporatist system, which means the government is going to keep bailing out these horrible banks with your tax dollars, and it's your fault, forever until it collapses. What they should do, Peter Schiff has talked about this, and he's right. Now, he's wrong about a bunch of other stuff, but he's right about this. If you just let these banks collapse, yes, it will be painful for 2 or 3 years, maybe 1 year, who knows, but no more than 3 years. It's going to suck. It's going to be awful. And then the economy will be fucking great because it actually will remove these systemic problems that we've had for 25 years that we've never healed because the government won't allow these banks to collapse. Too big to fail. It's like having a heroin addict, and instead of getting the guy off heroin and letting him go through withdrawals for a few days where it'll be horrible and he'll throw up and he'll shake and it'll be awful and terrible to watch and it'll be really painful for him, instead you say, well, I don't want you to go through any withdrawals, so I'll just keep giving you a little heroin whenever you need heroin for the rest of your life until you die, which is what would happen with that heroin addict. That is the exact same scenario you have in the United States government and other Western countries, because Europe's done this too, Japan's done this too, Canada, a little different. But you have the same scenario where we don't want to have any pain. No leader, including Trump, you Trump idiots, has the balls to say, we're not bailing out these fucking banks. We're going to go through this a rough period, a rough patch, and then everything will be fine. We don't have the balls to do this in the new left-wing, beta male collapsing world in which we live. So instead, we're just going to keep bailing out these banks for fucking ever, and it's your fault. It's not my fault. I don't vote for these people. I don't live in the United States anymore. Again, this is your problem, not mine. Next thing about this, and some of you have already commented about this and asked me about this. Caleb, what the hell are with these libertarian tech bros, these Silicon Valley guys who are hardcore libertarians, and they start these companies, and then as soon as the companies fail, they go right to the government and beg for free money to bail them out? Let me say something very clearly, and I've been leading up to this for quite a while, and I've actually hinted at this. I've said this, but not this emphatically. 99% of public figures who say they're libertarians are lying. This is now, and this has been a long time, going all the way back to when Bill Maher, can you imagine this? Bill Maher, who is for government-run healthcare, was going around calling himself a libertarian. okay? Public figures who are public in the public eye, on social media, on TV, who say they're libertarians are lying, 99%. Okay, the only one that I can remember who was actually telling the truth was Ron Paul. Not Rand Paul, Ron Paul. He was actually being honest about this. But just about everyone else who I've seen in the public eye identify themselves as a libertarian, you just wait a year or two and all of a sudden the real person comes out and they fucking love big government. Now, I am not talking here about normal rank and file, non-famous libertarians you meet. If you meet a libertarian and he is a real libertarian, he might be telling the truth. Although you got to ask them some questions too. You're a libertarian. Who did you vote for in the last presidential election? If they say Trump, that is not a libertarian. Trump is one of the biggest big government presidents, not only in American history, but in world history. So if you voted for Trump, you are not a libertarian. I don't care what you call yourself. But there are some real libertarians, but they're just not public figures. Make sense? Libertarians, real libertarians would be like Doug Casey. He's a libertarian. Michael Malice is a anarchist. There's just a handful of guys who are real libertarians. But the vast majority of people who call themselves libertarians are lying. They are not libertarians. If you just ask them enough questions, all of a sudden they will give some answers where they want big government. I am one of the rare human beings on earth who has a somewhat of a public audience, who self-identifies as a libertarian. I make it clear I'm a minarchist libertarian. I'm not an anarchist like Michael Malice. And I actually am a libertarian. Here's the libertarian test. I've talked about this in my personal life when I talk to people. If there was a big red button in front of you, okay, if you're an American or Canadian, Western European, so change this to whatever Western country you live in, but I'll say American. If you're an American, you got a big red button in front of you. If you press the button, the entire government apparatus of the United States, state, local, federal, including federal, would drop by 50%. You could press that button and reduce the size of government by 50%. Well, Caleb, it depends on what departments. All departments equally affected, including the military, everything, okay? 50% smaller, half. Would you press that button? Most of you would probably not press that button. You get nervous. Well, I want to, but what about the military? Or what I want to, but what about my free stimmy checks? Or what I want to, what about this? That means you're not a libertarian. You like big government because, as I've talked about before, the United States is the biggest government in all of human history. I just look at the recent numbers. If you add up state, local, federal spending, the United States, it's $9 trillion a year. It's half the GDP. God. So now take me. Would I press that button? Not only would I press that button, I would press it twice. I'd press it, get it down to 50%. I'd press it again, get it down to 25%, and then I'd evaluate. Because I'm a libertarian. When I say I'm a libertarian, I mean it. I'm not full of shit. I've had financial problems in my life in the past. Do you think for one second I even had the thought, well, I could go to the government. I could go get a, SBA loan, or I could go get a little bailout, or I could go on unemployment, or I've never even had that thought. I did a video of this on my other channel, my Alpha Male 2.0 channel, where I talked about I consider government money as blood money. I don't want blood money. I don't want that in my life because that was taken at the point of a gun. You pay taxes at the point of a gun. You're forced at gunpoint to pay your taxes. That's not true. They don't put a gun in your face. Yes, if you don't believe me, stop paying your taxes and wait a few years and watch what happens. Now, because government is incompetent, nothing will happen for a long time. But eventually, people with guns are going to come to your house and demand money or take you to jail. And if you don't go to jail, if you don't follow instructions, they'll shoot you in the fucking head. So taxes are collected by coercion, okay? So because taxes are collected that way, I don't want government money. I've talked about this. We didn't get any stimmy checks, Pink Firefly and I, during the pandemic. But toward the end, for some reason, we got one. I don't know why. I make way too much money. That's why we didn't get them. But we did get one at the end, and we each got like $600. I don't know why. I've talked about this. I took that check down to the bank. I deposited it in my account. As soon as it was in my account, I had my phone out there, my online bank. I saw the deposit go through. I immediately donated all of it to charity. I did not want that money even in my account. Because I knew if I didn't deposit, I would get checks and notices from the IRS. You didn't deposit your check. So it was in my account for about 10 seconds. Because I don't want that kind of money. Boy, have I gone off topic. Although I really hasn't. This bank bailout thing is not necessarily a problem with the banks. It is. It's a problem with the governmental structure under which these banks operate. They operate under a structure where the government says, don't worry, big corrupt piece of shit banker who's worth millions of dollars, in some cases billions of dollars, Peter Thiel, okay? Don't worry, Mr. Libertarian, we'll hand you piles of money and bail your ass out if you make any reckless decisions, and we're gonna make this stupid excuse about we have to save the banking system. So don't worry, go do whatever you want. And the bankers go, fuck yeah, this is great. And they go do whatever they want. They take risks they would never take if they didn't have that option. If we actually had a capitalist system, a capitalist free market system in the United States or other parts of the Western world, you would not have these problems. Yes, you would have bank failures. Yes, occasionally you would have bank runs, but they would be small. They'd be little. They wouldn't be a big deal. They wouldn't be systemic, because that's how small government works. Unfortunately, we live in an era where nobody, including you Trump people, wants small government. Everyone wants gigantic government. And so you have now created a system where we're going to have these banks fail. And these banks are going to keep failing and failing and failing and failing and failing. The government's going to keep bailing them out and bailing them out and bailing them out with your money. And they're not going to bail you out. They're going to bail the banks out. And that cycle is going to keep continuing forever until America can't do it anymore. They run out of money, or the collapse of the US dollar, or what have you. Several different scenarios I've covered in my other videos. And then the United States will collapse. And then, as I've said, when the United States collapse in our lifetime, which it will happen, and Canada and Europe, people are going to say, why did it collapse? What the hell happened? They're not going to know why. That's it. That's the bank bailout system. And that is something you need to start getting used to if you decide to stay long-term in your collapsing Western country. If you decide to stay long-term in the United States, I don't know why, unless you have very small children and you're divorced. That's the only excuse I can think of that's valid. Outside of that, I don't know why you're doing it. Fine, you need to get used to this. Just like you have to get used to regular civil unrest in American and Western cities, the next thing you need to get used to is banks collapsing, everyone freaking out, the government taking your tax dollars, bailing them out, and going further into debt, printing more money, creating more inflation, higher taxes until America collapses. You just gotta get used to this. It's part of the system you designed by voting for the lesser of two evils for the past 35 years. It's very simple. This actually isn't very complicated at all. Really, it's horrible, it's sad. I got done being sad about this a long time ago, but that's the scenario in which we live. I wish I had better news, I don't. If you want me to talk more about this topic, I certainly can. But I will see you in the next podcast, the next video. Have fun. Bye.